Welcome, Barbara, Lexi, and Susan. It's wonderful to have you all here at the National Book Festival. Let's jump right in. The Year of the Buttered Cat is based on the real-life story of Lexi Haas. The book gives us a window into Lexi's mind as she deals with a severe form of cerebral palsy, which results in a lack of muscle control and the inability to speak. It's an empowering story with a sense of humor, and Lexi has provided written answers to some questions in advance for us. If you would like to learn more about the technology that she uses to communicate, Lexi and Susan will be at the STEM District stage at 4:30 p.m. sharing more about it. And I also want to let you know we have the honor of announcing that Lexi is, as far as we know, the first NBF author to present here using an augmentative device. And Susan wanted to point that out because she thinks that is a very big first for the disability community, and I agree. So, all right, so let's talk about Unstuck. Unstuck is the fictional account of Lila, a young writer wrestling with a big story that she has in her head, but struggling to get it put out on paper. Both books are about getting the stories that are in our heads and our hearts out into the world. Barbara, I want to start with you. Lila is finding her voice in several different settings, including at school, with family and friends, and as a writer. In Unstuck, you bring 3 storylines, and actually 4, counting Lila's story, together. Would you talk a bit about how you balance multiple storylines?
Well, you know, I write about challenging topics like climate change, mental illness, addiction, sexual harassment, and I never want my books to be depressing or heavy. I always incorporate these other storylines about school, family, and friendship, no matter what the topic is. And I do it for 2 reasons. One is so that it sort of aerates the more challenging topic, so that no kid ever reads one of my books and gets depressed by the end of it. Because, you know, when you incorporate stories about family and friendship and school, there's an opportunity for humor and other emotions. So it just makes for a richer tapestry that way. The other reason I incorporate these other storylines is because I just think it makes the story more authentic. That's always the most important thing to me, to write a story that feels real. And when you think about a kid's life, even if a kid is facing a lot of challenges, the kid's life, the kid's daily life is not just challenge, challenge, challenge all day long. They still have to do their math homework. They're still on the soccer team. They're still feeling bad because they got left out of a sleepover, you know. So it's just more, it's a richer and more authentic story when you incorporate these other elements. So I always do that.
I think you've got the authenticity thing down.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So the 3 of us, actually the 4 of us, Lexi included, have talked about how the main characters in these books are similar. Lexi and Lila both have challenges communicating. Would you both share a bit about Lila and Lexi and how they navigate their challenges and why you thought it was important to share their stories? And we'll start with Barbara.
Well, in Unstuck, Lila is a voracious reader. The thing that she likes to read most of all is fantasy fiction. And since the end of 6th grade, she's been imagining a whole fantasy story in her head. And it's just very elaborate, with a lot of world building and maps and all kinds of things in her head. And at the beginning of 7th grade, she's got this incredible new teacher for ELA who gives them an opportunity to do creative writing at the end of every period. And Lila thinks this is her opportunity to get this story in her head on paper. But she's very stressed out because she's trying to impress the teacher. She's trying to win a writing contest that her sister, her superstar older sister, has won in the past. She's trying to impress friends who are pulling away. She's also feeling like she needs to compete with all of these amazing authors that she loves so much. She needs to be worthy of the genre. So she's stressing herself to the point where she can't get past the first chapter. And it's something that I see in kids a lot. I visit schools a lot. I get emails frequently from kids who write to me and say things like, I'm writing a series and I'm stuck on page 7. How do I get past? How do I get to page 8? And I was answering this question so often, I started to realize that frequently kids experiencing writer's block are the best readers because they have all these books in their heads that they feel like they need to, be worthy of. And it puts pressure on them. So I was answering this question so frequently that I thought I should write a book about it. So that's what Unstuck is. It's not a how-to book, although at the end of the book, there's 25 ways to get unstuck, which are some of the things that Lila tries and also some of the things that I use when I get stuck. But it's, it's a work of fiction.
Okay, Susan, a little bit about Lexi's journey. It's brought some difficult moments that you reflect on in your book. What similarities do you see between Lexi's story and Lila's? And then after that, there was one particular incident on social media that deeply affected your family, and I'd like you to share about that.
Sure. So reading Unstuck, which is amazing. If you haven't picked it up, you really should. Great voice. I was struck by the fact that at the end of this story, there is still a lot of work to do for both these characters. Their stories don't end there. It doesn't just wrap up nicely with a bow, which I think is what real life is about. And I think kids need to read stories like that show that it can still be a happy ending, even if it's not over and it's continuing. About what's inspired us to write, which I think is a very important and a very difficult, and I'm sorry to say this is going to be a little bit triggering for some people, but it came from a social media post. Lexi developed a fairly sized following on social media as a medical pioneer, and we used to get messages all the time, mostly inspiring and happy and encouraging for her. But one morning, my husband and I woke up to this post on her page that really rocked our world, and it said, "My best friend Lexi died last night in a terrible car accident, and this retard gets to live." Just let that sink in. And as a parent, I had been parenting Lexi for a number of years, and of course I knew all the amazing things about her, but it was the first time that I realized the rest of the world doesn't necessarily know this, that there are still people out there who consider persons with disabilities as lesser or even disposable, and there is nothing that can be further from the truth. So we knew at that point we had to get Lexi's story out there. So that was sort of our initial inspiration for writing down The Year of the Buttered Cat.
Wow. So Barbara, a big part of being a middle schooler is learning to regulate your emotions. You have said that your books often start with a character and an emotion. Would you tell us a little bit more about what that means?
Well, I think you can have an idea for a plot or even a topic, but it's not a book unless you've got your character. And I think of plot as character plus a verb, basically. It all comes back to character. And one of the reasons I love writing for middle grade readers or middle school readers is that middle schoolers are so complicated. They're not just one thing. They're not just one way all the time. If I'm reading a book and the protagonist is a middle schooler and she's nothing but spunky and adorable, I close the book, because that's not really what middle schoolers are like. They're complicated. They're moody. They're impulsive. They're judgmental. They're goofy. They're generous. They're kind. They're a bunch of stuff. So I write character first, and I'm always thinking of the ways that the characters are complicated and even contradictory and grow, because middle schoolers are growing, in real time. I think of them as tadpoles turning into frogs. And if you've ever seen a tadpole turning into a frog, they have legs and tails at the same time. So all of my characters have to go through a kind of journey, but it's all about their emotions. And one of the ways that Lila gets unstuck is by following a little bit of advice that her teacher gives her, which is write your feelings. Because Lila is writing from up here or here. She has to learn how to write from here. And once she realizes that the story that she's writing, which is, you know, convoluted and complicated and elaborate, is really about herself and what she's feeling, all of a sudden it's like a door opens up and she's able to produce words. So, you know, being in touch with your feelings as a writer and always examining your feelings and you know, using your feelings in your writing is a way to get unstuck if you're having writer's block.
Well, speaking of journeys and learning about oneself, my next question is for you, Lexi. So the Year of the Buttered Cat took almost 5 years to write. Lexi, I'd love to know, what did you learn about yourself during the process of writing this book? And Susan, we'd also like to have you respond to that.
Okay, I'm going to do Lexi's first, where I'm going to activate this for her because she's got a tough body today.
I was around 10 through 15 years old while we were writing Buttered Cat. At that point, I was already a huge reader. I already knew that every book I read changed me and my perspective in some way. Some were huge shifts and others were microscopic, but each book changed me. So writing my own story and realizing that Buttered Cat would go out into the world and maybe have that effect on at least some of the people who picked it up, that was an amazing epiphany for a kid who couldn't talk. So writing Buttered Cat taught me that even though I couldn't speak, I had a voice and I needed to use it.
Excellent. And for me, you know, Lexi and I had very different journeys in this. One of the things I discovered was that I was still grieving. I didn't know that when I sat down to write, but I was still grieving. I think this is very common for parents who have kids with a significant disability. Even you love your child, and of course you wouldn't trade them for anything, but you do have a life you have to give up. What you thought was going to be the life for your child,
Right.
what you thought was going to be your life. And I needed to go through that grieving process. And the Buttered Cat story actually incorporates my grief journey, my arc as a parent into this. And I think it turned into a message for other parents that it's okay to go off script for grieving, that you don't have to do it the way everybody else does, but you have to do it. You have to go through it. You can't just leapfrog straight to happy. You know, if you don't go through that, you will miss the beautiful and remarkable moments that happen around you with the life that you have if you continue to just get stuck in the life that you're supposed to have.
Right, yeah. And I suppose that is, you want to model that for your child as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. But, you know, to be honest, it was Lexi who modeled it for us. You know, Lexi, despite what she has gone through, has been happy. I can't say that every moment is happy. Everybody has moments of grief, and it's not okay to just cover that up, as I'm saying. But for Lexi, she was just managed to find happy and upright so easily. And it just made it easy for our family to also say, you know, if she can do this, I can do this. She gave us the template for moving forward.
Right away when we started, of course, we had to talk a bit to sort of coordinate this conversation, and Lexi's light just came through even on Zoom right away.
Yeah.
So.
She's an amazing girl, young lady.
So Lexi, I understand that you are an avid reader and that you are passionate about the need for diverse books. Would you share with us why diverse storytelling is so important to you?
This is definitely one of Lexi's talking points, and she will bend an ear on this. So she had a lot to say here, so I'm hoping this will come through on her device here.
I've said many times that the superpower of diverse books is how they make readers feel seen, heard, and connected. I don't identify as LGBTQ or as a person of color, but I do identify as other, as someone who doesn't feel easily accepted or understood by mainstream society. I am concerned with censoring of diverse books in part because they are a lifeline for kids who feel other. As a society, we say we care about kids' mental health, but taking away lifelines like literature that makes a kid feel seen, makes a kid feel connected, is a step in the wrong direction for improving mental health. Instead, Maybe parents should take the time to read these books with their kids and discuss themes together in a non-judgmental way. Maybe it's like, hey, this isn't how I identify, but that doesn't make this character's experience or point of view any less important. And if a parent decides that a book isn't appropriate for their child, that's up to them. But they don't get to decide that for everyone. Because the book that was removed from a school bookshelf might be someone else's lifeline, someone else's epiphany.
That's beautiful. Sorry. Despite some physical limitations, you lead a very full and active life. What are some of the activities you enjoy that might surprise people?
Activities that might surprise people.
I think people would be surprised to learn that I am an accomplished knife juggler. Actually, the most surprising thing I do is performing dance. I am part of an inclusive dance program in Charlotte that brings people with and without disabilities together. It has taught me how to express myself in a completely new way that is accessible to everyone, and I just love it.
Barbara, in Unstuck, you write about Lila's struggle with writer's block in your book. Would you tell us about a time you got stuck, I'm so sorry, folks, with your own writing and how you got through it?
Well, my first book came out in 2006. It was called Just Another Day in My Insanely Real Life, which is quite a title. And it did pretty well for a debut book. And so for my second book, I thought, okay, well, I have to write a bigger book. It has to have more intellectual heft to it. It has to be more ambitious. So I started doing all this research about Mayan hieroglyphics and reptiles and codes, all kinds of topics that I didn't know anything about. And the more research I did, the more I realized I didn't know, and the more research I needed to do. And soon I became overwhelmed with my research. I just kept researching. And one day my kid asked me what my book was about, and I started telling him about all my research. And he said, okay, but what's it about? And I realized I didn't know what it was about. I was just buried in research. And I started to feel like an imposter, like I had published a book, it had done well, and now I was just sort of faking it. I was just doing research to sort of do research. And I realized, you know what? That's really what the main character is feeling, that imposter syndrome thing, where you feel like a fake. And I realized that I could use those feelings to write from that perspective of that character. And again, it's the writing your feelings thing. That's how I got through that, that bit of writer's block.
So I have enjoyed talking with you about your books. Both stories are inspirational. I wonder if you would share with us about your next books.
You go first, Barbara.
My
You're on a
next
roll.
book is called Tear This Down, and I think it's timely because it's about a 7th grade girl who's doing research about the most important historical figure of her town. Everything is named after him. There's a statue of him in the town, in the downtown. Her middle school has his name on it. And in the course of doing research about this guy, she learns, to her shock and outrage, that he did not believe women should be allowed to vote. So she wants to tear down his statue and basically erase his name from the town. So it's a book about women's rights and voting rights and the suffragist movement, how we got those rights for women. And I think it's a book that, you know, all of a sudden feels very relevant.
Yeah, that sounds very well timed.
Yeah.
Susan and Lexi, what's coming up for you?
And I think yours is coming out in February.
This
that
is
right?
coming out in February.
Ours is coming out in the fall. It's our first fiction story. It's called Fooled. And it's about a group of special education students in a very rundown school in a very rundown town in rural North Carolina. And they're not accepted in their school system. And sort of instead, they develop a school of magic in their classroom just for fun. You know, that's their school. And then due to this strange circumstance with the school bullies, a run-in with the school bullies, the school starts to believe that the kids are actual magicians. And the question is, you know, how much can they change their school before the ruse is up? How much before they realize that they've fooled the school? But it is also a story about special education. It's about these students that a lot of people in schools know nothing about. And it talks it gets into a little bit about the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. So yeah, we're super excited for it.
Well, we are too. We will definitely look forward to both of your new books. I think we have a few minutes. We might have time for a couple of questions from the audience, so if you want to make your way to the microphones on either side, I think we have time for 2 questions. And please, when you're asking your question, make sure we know who you'd like to respond.
This is towards Lexi and her mom. What disabilities do you think you'll be showing in your book?
That's a really great question. So we do have a number of students, though, with different disabilities. We don't really name them because that's sort of real life. You don't go around talking about your disability. But I will say that the main character does have cerebral palsy. She's a full-time wheelchair user, and she uses augmentative communication. And part of her journey is learning that her device does not make her weird. Using her device makes her heard. So she's the main one. There's her best friend is Scoot, and he has a form of autism. And then there's a couple of other just varying disabilities in there that we won't name here. I think you will be able to probably pick out when you read it.
There's one over here.
Can I? Okay. Can you all hear me? You can hear me? Sweet.
Yes.
Okay. My question is also for Lexi and her mom. I did want to share that I was born 3.5 months early, at 25 weeks gestation, and then my twin brother was born a week later. It's a really long story. But I could have developed cerebral palsy, and they were watching me for markers of that as I grew up, and I just have hydrocephalus, which is enough. But my question is more so for Lexi than for you, Ma. But Lexi, what are you interested in doing? Are you interested in continuing a possible career as a writer, or would it be as something completely different? Are you looking at going to college or just writing full-time?
Unfortunately, since Lexi has to have questions written ahead of time,
Yeah, I got you.
but this is one that we have answered a bunch of times at school. So tongue out means yes. You learned that in her book, right? As you were saying, are you interested in continuing this? She is. She does want to be a writer. She does take college classes online. She has been for a couple of years. And just as a lifelong learner, we're not concerned about whether she gets a degree or not.
Right.
We want her to learn to continue to love learning and just learn about whatever is most important to her at that moment.
I definitely agree with that wholeheartedly.
Audience, would you please help me thank our panel, Barbara D., Susan Haas, and Lexi Haas.